because all those boxers from the early 1900s and 20s, by the time they were 25, Ad Wolgast, lightweight champ, he didn't know who or where he was at 25 years of age. Same with terrible Terry McGovern, featherweight and lightweight champ. So all these guys from that era, when you read about them, terrible brain damage, led with their head, didn't know anything about defense. And of course, they didn't have the medical knowledge back then. They just say that he was punch drunk. And
or they wouldn't even say, they make it cute. Oh, he's punchy. It was like a joke. It was laughed off. It's the most tragic of circumstances, but they would just kind of make a jest of it. Oh, he's punchy. Like it was a temporary condition. No, it's permanent brain damage. Right.
And they were not only had dementia, they were broke. The managers stole their money. And I was thinking about this last night, thinking about this show. George's manager, Irv Uckerman, there's a rule in Ontario. It's Ontario law. You can't manage and promote an athlete. You do one or the other. Mm-hmm. That's in all boxing jurisdictions. And so Irv promoted George, took a fee for that, and he also took an exorbitant fee for managing him. That's illegal. You're not supposed to do that. So George,
boxing management and legality don't belong in the same sentence, actually.
You're right. You're right. It's like when people say to me that's morality. And I always say, if you're looking for morality, you're not looking at boxing. No. And so these guys, all of them. I'm working on a Substack article on Eddie Machen, who I know Mitch knows. And Eddie never fought George, and he didn't fight for the title. His manager was mobbed up, and he ended up broke. He fought Liston and went the distance. He fought all these great fighters and won, ended up with no money. And he's making 40, 50 grand a fight. And his manager signs a contract, you'll get 20 grand. And he ends up getting 1 or 2 grand. Why? Because his manager's a mobster and puts a gun to his head. So all these great fighters from the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, even today, the mob's still in it. The mob's in it in a different way. What the mob does now is, if you go to Bob Arum and say, my guy wants to have a title shot against your guy, they'll say, great. And you say, and my guy wants this amount. Okay. But he's got an advisor, Vincenzo, and he's going to want 700-800 grand for an advising fee. And you have to pay it. Also, the sanctioning bodies are full of convicted felons. So 2 weeks.
Yeah. Can we go back to Machen just for a second, Lou?
Sure.
Refresh my memory, if you do remember, he died very tragically too, didn't he?
Mm-hmm.
Was he?
That's what I'm looking into. Him and Zora Foley within a year of each other.
Yeah.
So Zora Foley, they thought both were mob murders. Turns out, several of the witnesses, Zora Foley said, he got drunk. He said to his girlfriend, I'm going to jump into the swimming pool. He's on like the 3rd or 4th floor of his balcony in a hotel, and he jumped and he missed. Didn't hit the swimming pool, hit the cement on the side. Oh, man. Now, Zora Foley suffered from depression. And so during his career, he'd be hospitalized. He'd threatened to kill himself. A couple times, twice, he had a standoff on the highway where he had a gun to his head. And the police talked him down.
Former military man, too, right? Was he in the army?
I don't think Machen was. No, Machen.
No, not Machen. Foley. Was Foley?
Yes.
Foley, sorry.
That's right. And Machen was an amateur boxer, robbed a store, went to prison for 3 years, came out, started to box, had a good manager, and it's in California. The mob saw him, sent Sid Flaherty, and Sid said, now you belong to me. And so he starts to fight. He's not getting any money, but he has chronic depression. And no one would have seen a psychiatrist back then, especially a boxer.
No. Fighters are supposed to be beyond that, right? They're supposed to be. But think about the psychological factor that's prevalent in all facets of life, including boxing. Often when I saw Muhammad Ali, especially pre-fight, I thought that he was psychologically not only degrading his future opponent, but also building himself up psychologically.
Absolutely.
Right? I think Muhammad Ali, especially early on in his career, was nervous and scared as anybody, right? Like he had the jitters, so he would just hype himself up with all this hyperbole and yelling and screaming the antics,
Right.
make himself feel like he was ready to, like they talk about him, the observation and test before the first Liston fight. They said his heart rate and his blood pressure were like alarming. They weren't even going to let him fight because he was so worked up. And I think that's the way he got himself mentally prepared to fight. Someone he called the big ugly bear.
Now,
Liston, who was considered invincible at that time. Sorry.
Both of you knew Ali.
Yes.
Right. What was he like?
I met him when I was 13, 14, when he brought, I was at the fight. Mitch, you probably were there at Maple Leaf Gardens when Angelo Dundee brought in Jose Napoles to fight Clyde Gray.
70, was that 75, Lou?
I think 74.
74. Thank you. At 74. And you know what's very distinctive about that fight? That was the first fight ever where they'd actually post the judges' scorecards.
That's right.
Throughout the fight, right, in Maple Leaf Gardens. And it made it kind of anticlimactic because once Clyde got behind a little bit, people knew there was no way for him to win unless he could knock him out. It was poorly done. They should always keep that, a little bit under wraps until the final.
Oh, I agree. And I remember distinctly your father saying to him, he's pounding on the canvas and he's saying, Clyde, this is for the world championship of the entire world. Knock him out. He's an old man. He's ready to go.
I remember my dad screaming, punch and duck, punch and duck, punch. And then as soon as he finished punching, move your head, duck. Because as soon as you stop punching, Napoles would come right back, right? So a piece of technique that George had employed. And it started to work for Clyde, but unfortunately, he started too late. He started too late.
Was he a nice guy? Was Ali a nice guy?
Yeah.
Sorry, we're going back to Ali.
That's okay. That's okay. I love this banter. I love it.
I met him after the fight because I stayed and I met Angelo Dundee. And he said, "You want to meet the big guy?" And I said, "Yes." So this is kind of funny. I was 13. And Muhammad came out. And for a 13-year-old, especially a short guy like me, he was as big as a building. And I just started to cry. But he understood. And he said, how are you doing in school? And I said that I'm doing all right. We'll try harder. And I just told him he was my hero. And I didn't see him again. I kept in touch with Angelo, but I didn't see Muhammad again till 2004. And I started to cry. And he said, "You're going to give me a complex." So I asked him in 2004, I said, "When you fought Liston the first time, were you scared?" And he said, "You're as dumb as you look." And I said, "Muhammad, I hate to say this to you, but I'm actually way dumber than I look. As stupid as I look to you, I'm much stupider than that." And he said, "Yeah, I was terrified. That's why, as Mitch said, Mitch hit it on the head. That's why I was talking. I wasn't talking to him. I was talking to myself to convince myself I could beat him because this is a guy that terrified people in prison." And I knew from friends, they said the only thing tough guys in prison are afraid of are crazy guys because you can't predict them. And when you look at the history, Liston was a mob fighter. He was controlled by the Chicago mob, the outfit, the most powerful of all the mob families. And the one thing the mob can't tolerate is loose screws, guys that go off the deep end. So Crazy Joe Gallo, other guys, Dutch Schultz, guys that are loose cannons can't be tolerated. They can hurt you. You got to get rid of them. And so Ali acted that way. Liston didn't know how to take him. And at the center of the ring for the referee's instructions, Angelo said, "Stand up straight. He's 6'1". You're 6'3.5". And he did. Look down at him and start talking. And he did. And he knew that before Liston's team had put Lena Horne lookalikes in the audience. And they'd say, "You're going to go home with her tonight." And Ali was saying, "I'm not afraid of you. Lena Horne's going home with me tonight. Ain't no Lena Horne for you. You're nothing but a bum. You're in your 40s. And when they did interviews before the fight, when people were interviewing both of them, He said, you can't even spell your name. What's your name? Somebody listening. How do you spell it? Spell your name. So Liston was a barely functioning illiterate. George Foreman told me he felt horrible for him. No one had cared about him. No one took the time to teach him to read. So Ali played on that. And because he was a mob fighter, and this happened with Eddie Machen, when Machen was doing well, though Liston dominated the fight, they put oil of wintergreen on his gloves. And you can see Machen from the fourth round on. He's blinking. He can't pick up Liston's punches. They did the same thing to Ali. Now, the thing about this gets to the point Mitch was talking about Machen's death. People say, was it suicide? Could have been. He had chronic depression. What was it an accident? It was a murder. Angelo and Chris Dundee said it was murder because he came out at the time and his own mob manager said, keep your mouth shut. And he said they loaded up Liston's gloves. They put something on him. And when it happened to Ali, he went and said it again. And people said to him, shut up, Eddie Machen. You're going to get yourself killed. He said the mob has a long memory and you don't embarrass them in public like that. Ali did after the Liston fight, but Ali had the FOI, the Fruit of Islam, the military wing of the Nation of Islam to back him up. And they had more members than all the mob families together. But
Mitch, I just want to go to you for a sec. You've had some interesting experiences with both Ali and with Joe Louis.
And Joe Frazier too. Yeah.
Like phenomenal stories. What comes to mind when you think about those great guys?
Okay, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Muhammad Ali, and I have to be careful with my language here. Fighters. One thing that made Muhammad Ali so great was he was a clean liver, right? He didn't drink, he didn't do drugs, but he did have a couple of vices, and one of them was women. So whenever I met Muhammad, and it was always, he'd always be. He knew once I got to have a bit of. I met him very briefly, just when I was a kid, like zoom, right? And you're too young to comprehend. But when I was 31, I went with my dad to the Rocky Marciano charitable dinner in Brockton, Massachusetts, and they had a huge number of great fighters, like equal to anything you would get in an International Boxing Hall of Fame. There were Jake LaMotta, Fulmer, Ali, Lennox Lewis. I even got Donnie Lalonde from Canada. Anyway, Ray Leonard, everybody, Duran, everybody. So we're staying at the same hotel as Muhammad, and we go outside to wait for our drive to. We actually stayed in Hartford, Connecticut, which is about 10 minutes away across the border into Massachusetts, into Brockton, Massachusetts. So my dad and I come out, and we're waiting for the cab to pick us up. And who is there but Ali's boyhood friend, Howard Bingham, who Muhammad always called the non-believer because he wouldn't convert to Islam, right? So, but one of the things Howard Bingham did was he chronicled Muhammad's life in pictures. He was a photographer, and he had some conversations with my dad during the 60s and 70s because my dad was an ardent photographer too. He loved taking pictures, and my dad even had a darkroom developing pictures in our basement in Etobicoke. So, hey, Howard, George, how you doing? Hey, good night. Nice to see you. This is my son, Mitch. Hi, Mr. Bingham. Noah. Hi, Mitch. How you doing? Nice to see you. And Howard says, how are you getting there? I said, well, cabs are supposed to come pick us up. And Howard says, no, come with us. We're going in a limo. So behind us, about 20 meters back, it's like, remember, this is pre-cell phone days, right? This is not everybody had a camera. This roar of the crowd, like you wouldn't believe it. Like maybe 100 people, Muhammad, everybody's screaming. I turn around, I see Muhammad's back there. Now it takes him pictures, autographs, people loving him, grabbing him. It takes him about 10 or 15 minutes to get 20 meters ahead. Finally, he gets up to us, and Muhammad's limo pulls up, big stretch white limo, right? Everybody's trying to get up at like I'm literally trying to grab the guy. And Muhammad looks at George. They hug each other. And he says, that's your son, George? He goes, that's my son, Mitch. Mitch. Yeah. And all of a sudden the door opens. Well, go in, but like from all this wild, raucous noise to like instantly quiet. So I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to have an audience with Muhammad Ali.
Yes.
At one time, the most famous personality in the world.
In the entire world. Yeah.
Yeah. Recognize, you got a shirt on, everybody knows it. Muhammad Ali, everybody knows him, right? Not just North America, the world knows him. He belongs to the world. So I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to have an audience with Muhammad. And of course, a stretch limo, and I'm kind of a shy guy at the time. I go to one side of and up at the other end of the limo, if you can imagine it, are Muhammad Ali in the middle, my dad on one side, Howard Bingham on the other. And again, Muhammad turns to my dad and he goes, "That's your son, George?" I'm trying to do his Kentucky accent, which I'm not very good at. He goes, "Yeah, that's my son, Mitch." He goes, "Mitch." He looks at me. I go, "I got to remember this. Whatever you do, Mitch, remember this for the rest of your life. This is something you're going to tell your grandkids, right?" He goes, "Mitch." I go, "Yeah, Muhammad." He goes, "Come here, man." So I get like halfway. I go up halfway. He goes, "Mitch." I go, "Yeah, Muhammad." I'm thinking, oh my God, like I must look like the true believer. Like my eyes are open. Like I'm a sponge. I want to suck this in. He goes, "Mitch." I go, "Yeah, Mom." He's, "Come here, man." So I go up beside Howard Bingham. He pushes Howard out of the way. He pulls me in beside him. So there's my dad, Muhammad, me. Muhammad puts his arm around me, and then Howard Bingham. I gotta remember this. He goes, "Mitch." I go, "Yeah, Muhammad." He goes, "Mitch." He looks, now I can't tell you exactly what he says because it's a little blue in nature.
It's illicit.
So what he said to me was, in other words, "How's your sex life?"
It's pretty assy, right?
Yeah, but he said it in a more vulgar way. All right.
Yeah. This great, prolific, this huge man.
He saw that I was just waiting for some word of wisdom that I'm going to hold here and dear to my heart the rest of my life. But that shows you his like social intelligence. Like, he's going to diffuse it with a joke. And he said something very blue to me. And they all, those three older cats, they laughed their head off. And I was there shocked. And I said,
great, man.
"Not as good as yours, Muhammad." And they all laughed. Yeah.
Wow, that's a great line.
Yeah. So he welcomed me into his inner circle with that. And my takeaways from Muhammad, as much as people look at him as a huge socio-political phenomenon, which he was a product of his times. He was the right place. He was the right person at the right place at the right time for him to like enlarge everybody's view of, the way the world should be, listening to someone who came through that civil rights era. The one thing that always stuck with me was when he was around other fighters and the guys, he was a guy's guy. He absolutely loved women. And right. And when you think about what did him in, okay. And
it was women.
It was women because he had, look at 4 wives, 9 children in wedlock, 9 out of wedlock.
It's a lot of alimony.
And then 4 or 5 who claim to be.
He was with 3 women the night before he fought Ken Norton a 3rd time.
There you go.
Angelo told me when he lost to Frazier after the first fight, Dana Ross came in to console him. And the promoter, Jerry Parenchio, this is after the fans had cleared out of Madison Square Garden, walking around, tabulating numbers, and goes, "Oh, Muhammad promised me his gloves." So he didn't knock. He walked in, and there is Dana Ross performing a sexual act on Muhammad Ali.
Oh.
And Ali looked at him and said, "This is what you get when you lose." So
I want to ask you guys about.
Well, let me interrupt. You have to have Mitch tell the story about Joe Louis at his house. That's my favorite story.
Oh, okay. If you'll indulge me.
Go ahead. These are good stories.
So I'm like, it's hard for me to remember what year it was because it was so long ago, right? I was around 7 or 8 years old.
You were a little guy.
In the summertime. My parents had a party the night before, And it was like when we had parties at our house, and there was music, there were people like painting pictures, there's great food. My mother was the most generous hostess there ever was. Like, yeah, it was fantastic. It was a night to remember. Anyway, I get up early and I go downstairs into my kitchen. Now, I'd say it's about 8:00 on a Saturday morning, and my dad's outside with a garbage bag, and he's putting paper plates in, beer bottle, whatever. And there's a gentleman in the kitchen. He just nods at me. Rather large individual, right? I never seen him before. I never seen him at the boxing gym. Of course, but he looked like an older athlete, and he yells out to I go and I get myself cereal. Like, the traditional cereal of the day was like Cocoa Pebbles or Fruit Loops, or something that's supposed to be somewhat healthy for you, but it was terrible. So
full of sugar. Yeah.
Yeah. So the individual yells out to my dad, "Hey, George, can I get some ice cream?" Now I'm thinking, who gets to eat ice cream for breakfast? Like what kind of, like, this guy he's got real pull, right? And I go, if my mother ever saw me eating ice cream I'd get the what for, right? So I'm sitting there eating my Cocoa Pebbles or honeycombs or whatever I'm eating and watching him. He goes, "Hey, George, can I have some ice cream?" And my dad says, "Yeah, go ahead, champ, help yourself." So he opens up the freezer and he pulls out, you remember the Neapolitan ice cream, the strawberry, the vanilla,
3 flavors, yeah,
in the carton, right? Like that was the ice cream of the day. There was no Ben and Jerry's back then. So but so that, George, where are the spoons? Beside the drawer beside the stove, champ. So he goes in, he pulls out a big soup spoon. Now I'm sitting there just watching this, like, who gets to eat ice cream for breakfast, right? What about the bowls, George? Above the fridge, champ. And he goes and he opens it and he brings out soup bowl, not a little dessert bowl. He puts it all down there, and I'm just like, I just watch it. And he 3 huge scoops, like massive, like we're talking like, feed the Russian army type of scoops. So he puts the ice
definitely
cream
every kid's dream, right?
and 8 a.m. on a Saturday morning. Are you kidding me? Right. Summertime. Yeah, he sits there and he looks at me, and I'm eating, and he's looking at me, and I'm looking at him. And then he dips the spoon in. He goes to put it in his mouth, and he takes it and he puts it in my face, right in my right near. And I look at it. Now I'm thinking, I don't know this guy, right? I don't know him from Adam. Who is he? Like, he's double dipped, put it in, but he's sucked on the spoon and put it back in the ice cream. But I'm thinking more like, who gets to eat ice cream at 8 a.m.? Yeah. Right? He sticks it right in my face. And I don't know what to do. I'm in a bit of a quandary, a conundrum here. Like, what do I do? So I did what any red-blooded Canadian boy would do. I took the ice cream in my mouth. He pulls it back. And he goes back to eating, and he just smiles at me. Years later, I found out that was the great Joe Louis.
It was Joe Louis.
I remember going into the library in like grade 7 and 8. I'd always go to a boxing book and look up my dad's last name and see where he was. Nat Flesher's books, right? We're talking about writers and people who wrote about boxing earlier. And then I'd look for my dad, and I remember coming across a picture, and I recognized Joe Louis, and I brought it up. Hey, Dad, this was the guy who was. He goes, yeah, that was Joe Louis. He was here. Maybe the greatest. When you think of the three
ever, my opinion,
three greatest sports figures of the 20th century.
Yeah,
pretty hard to argue against 3 who were boxers. Number 1, Jack Dempsey, right? The Manasseh Mauler. He brought boxing into the modern era with his.
He made it global. Jack Dempsey made it a global phenomenon.
Absolutely. Joe Louis, because what he did, he was the first Black athlete to be accepted by Americans as being representative of who they were as a people. That's huge. And then Muhammad Ali, right? So the boxing has always created these characters who are even more than mythological. And I'll give you a quick one. Sorry to dominate the conversation. I'll give you a very quick one about Joe Frazier, whom I loved. Joe Frazier was. I've had a couple bourbons with Joe Frazier, and he was a man's man, straight from the heart. He loved my dad, by the way.
Yeah.
He said this
His
fight
dad was the closest person to him.
He said that his fight with my dad really made him realize, because he stopped my dad after 4 rounds. My dad had an eye injury from a previous fight. But he said that gave him such confidence. Anyway, we were at a couple of dinners. I had a couple of bourbons with him. Anyway, so tragic story is my mom takes her own life. So I go to the house the next day, and the phone rings, and I'm the only person there. I think my wife's downstairs, and I answer the phone. I go, hello. He goes, it's Joe Frazier. It's Georgia. I said, no, Joe's Mitch, George's son. He goes, Mitch, man, love you, man. He goes, hey, brother, I know what happened. I can't give you anything but love. And then he started to sing Amazing Grace
on the phone.
Yeah. So yeah, those are the heartfelt connections I have through the personalities in boxing that I'll always, I have mixed feelings about fighting, but I have no mixed feelings about what great people there are in the game too. So,
Joe Frazier absolutely adored George. And when you saw them at the Hall of Fame, they were in their own world. They didn't care about anyone else. Yeah. They loved each other. They hung out together. And they told each other, I love you. And when Joe was in the hospice, I think Mitch told me this, George called him. He said, I'm out Western Canada on a tour, but I'm coming to see you. Please hang on. I love you. Please hang on. And George got there the next day, just after Joe had passed. But these guys were friends as if they'd known each other since they were 2 or 3.
Yeah, well, I remember that, they'd sit beside each other at a boxing dinner, and I'd try to get close to hear the conversations because they were laughing uproariously. And what were you guys talking about? That's none of your business. Anyway, they kept that between themselves, which is the way it should be, actually.
What I'm trying to figure out is the how to really qualify the character of so many of these boxers, and quite frankly, where you guys fit in. Like, on one hand, you're telling me these stories of a lot of unethical things going on, a lot of mobbing down, right, or mobbing up. There's a lot of violence, right? Yet they love each other and they're buddies. And like all of us, when we get together, we would tell jokes, we would hang out, we would have a beer. And then you guys fit into this. Like, you're clearly so passionate about the world of boxing. You know so much about it. Is it all the sides of these people that intrigues you? Because it doesn't seem like a simple place to hang out.
It's many sides, but there's several things you have to establish at the beginning. Any fighter who was a mob fighter wasn't a mob fighter by his own choice.
Yeah.
They had no choice in the matter. The mob would get rid of their manager, put a mob manager in. You work for us. That's the way it goes. We control the sport. Right. So there's nothing. They didn't do it to Ali, and they didn't do it to George.
Luke, can I just say, a lot of people talk about Ali and his conversion to Islam, and that being like a real ideological one, and it was. Elijah Muhammad preached the gospel that a young Cassius Clay wanted to hear at that time. But what people don't understand is he got connected with the Nation of Islam because they had a militant sect that could stand up to the mob. Apparently, Terrell's people tried to muscle Ali's people in Chicago, and the Fruit of Islam had a couple of the mob strongmen hanging from the 24th floor by their ankles, say, "You're not intimidating us at all." So in some ways, they got rid of what was then the formal mob in boxing. But like as you say, there are mob elements still that persist to this day. So sorry.
Right. And so after the Ali fight with the Clay fight with Liston, the mob came backstage and they started to threaten Angelo. And Herbert Muhammad came out and said, you have nothing to do with him. You've ripped off enough black fighters over the last 100 years. You got nothing. He belongs to us, and we got the money and the manpower and the guns to back it up. You guys are done. Now, when they had Ernie Terrell, this is when the WBA stripped Ali of the title. They said because he had a rematch of Liston. They knew he had a rematch of Liston, but he wouldn't have got it if he didn't say, if I win, I'll give him a rematch.
Yeah, that's part of the normal part of the clause back then, right? When you
and still is today. And so what happens is I got a hold of the minutes from a meeting of the WBA, and they said, you know, they were talking about Liston and Ali, and where does this N-word get off saying that he's the greatest, and where does this N-word get off saying that he can convert? Thousands of people in the States every day change their name and convert. It was only because of the color of his skin that it upset him. Later on, Ali left the Nation of Islam because he didn't agree with the politics of Louis Farrakhan and where it was going. And he said he couldn't leave it earlier because they would have killed him. So he waited till Elijah Muhammad died, and then he left. But getting back to the early point, you know, George fights Ernie Terrell and beats him, but Ernie Terrell's a mob fighter. He's owned by the most powerful, the outfit in Chicago. You know, he beat Eddie Machen for the vacant title of this WBA that he stole from Ali. And so before the fight, and Mitch knows this better than me, you know, Bernie Glickman, who was a convicted killer for the Chicago mob, Robert Lipside of the New York Times said, how is he even in Canada? Is there a limit? Yeah, he said, is there a limit? If you kill less than 5 men, if you're a mobster, you're allowed in, but over 5, they draw the line. And he threatened Ungerman, he threatened the judges, and
threatened the referee Sammy Lovespring, who years later, and there was animus between my dad and Lovespring for many years.
Yeah,
but Sammy admitted later, he was threatened, and that it influenced his
absolutely.
And I don't blame Sammy for that at all. I mean, your family's being threatened. you're gonna do some strange things by people who are known killers, by the way, not just
yeah. And that's a salient point. It wasn't just Sammy; it was his family as well. And as Mitch well knows, the mob there's no incident in the history of the mob going back 150 years in North America of them ever making an idle threat.
No.
They back it up. So if they say to you, like in the 1919 World Series, if you win that game, we'll kill you, they would have. Yeah. So, and they had their wives and children of the baseball players to back it up. So in the fight with Terrell, and George beats Terrell up. Terrell, who was, for my money, one of the top 5 dirtiest fighters ever. You never saw George complain, but Terrell's thumbing him in the eye. He's headbutting him. He's kneeing him. He's using his elbows, his forearm. He's putting his glove in George's face and rubbing it. And the ref, Lovespring, doesn't do anything. He can't. Because
and what I'm really ticked off about Sammy in that fight and was he allowed Terrell to hold so many. I stopped counting after 90 break. Like, you start, people have been penalized and disqualified for holding that much. And